Hey guys, it's On the Line. This is a fun conversation. A lot of what we do here is pretty heavy and dark. Reece Martin, fascinating guy. I'm going to tell the story in the episode of how he and I ended up getting connected. Just kind of a weird coincidence where he was aware of what we were doing at the line, and I was aware of the work he was doing over at his own stuff. Reece is a transit and transportation expert and also a self-made guy. He's part of the fascinating new generation of, I guess we call them new media success stories of people who develop subject matter expertise and cultivate an audience and become genuine experts in something and become commentators and participants in policy discussions because they were passionate about it and because the new media tools let them do that. So the first few minutes of the podcast, we spent talking with Reece about how he went from a guy who was passionate about transit to an expert with a media platform. It's a pretty cool story. And there's more and more versions of like that out there. Then we do get into the weeds here a little bit in a good way. Canada no build good, something that Jen and I talk about a lot. We get into that, why we no build good, how we build gooder, but also some genuine success stories. Reece pushes back a little bit on the narrative. He points to some success stories we've had in Canada. How can we replicate them? How can we have more success stories like we've seen in Vancouver and Montreal, and not the disasters we've seen in Toronto and Ottawa? We talk about people who are good at it all over the world. We also talk a little bit about kind of the omni dysfunctions we see in Canada: defense procurement, housing, energy, transportation. A lot of the problems look and sound awfully familiar once you know what you're talking about. That with Reece Martin on this episode of On the Line. This episode is brought to you by BioCanRx. Health Canada approved a promising new immunotherapy, so now I can get it. Right? This summer, The Line is partnering with BioCanRx, a federally funded Canadian not-for-profit research network, to learn about cutting-edge cancer immunotherapy research that they're helping Canadian researchers bring from labs to patients in clinical trials, all in Canada. But as we all know, Canada isn't just one health jurisdiction. At the federal level, Health Canada assesses the safety and efficacy of all drugs and therapies in the country. And in a year, sometimes less, they can approve one for sale in Canada. That sounds like the end of the story, but it's just the start. Once Health Canada approves it, or sometimes while the assessment is happening, the drug's cost effectiveness is evaluated by Canada's drug agency. And then the ball goes to the provinces. They work together to negotiate prices with the drug maker to confirm it doesn't duplicate something they're already stocking and that its potential value justifies the cost. Only after that can it be provided by each province's Ministry of Health. Unsurprisingly, this process can take years. It's one reason that Canadian innovations leave the country to be developed elsewhere, and why drug companies don't always choose Canada to initially launch their products. In the US, they get FDA approval, set a price, and wait for the market to decide if the price is right. In Canada, Health Canada approves and lengthy negotiations start, with no revenue coming in during the process and no promise of a customer at the end. Organizations like BioCanRx are willing to wait out the dry years because they're not for profit, but companies with shareholders might skip the Canadian market until they're making big money elsewhere. This means Canadians have to wait on the system, even if they don't have time to waste. We'll talk more about these problems in the weeks to come. Thanks to BioCanRx for partnering with The Line to shed light on this story. To learn more, go to biocanrx.com. Well, I have been looking forward to this chat, and this is actually something funny that's happened. So let me just be a bit of a windbag just for a minute, and then I'll don't worry, Reece, I'll let you say something. But I've been in the traditional legacy media for almost 20 years, and one of the fascinating things that's happened in that time is that people have emerged as genuine subject matter experts through new media. And then ultimately, like in this incredible inversion, people used to be like, hey, I have a newspaper column or I was a radio show, and now I'm going to launch a podcast. Now people who are successful in the new media end up getting noticed by the older media and start going there as well. And I found this fascinating because a couple of days ago, I was reading in my hometown paper, the Toronto Star, an article about high-speed rail in Canada. And the author was Reece Martin, someone who I knew from his YouTube channel and his social media presence, but also other op-eds of his that I had read. And then in my inbox, I find a note from him introducing himself to me, and the timing couldn't have been better because I had just read his article like 2 days earlier. So Reece Martin, my guest here on the show, transit and transportation expert. We're going to talk transit and transportation, but first I just want to ask you a question about you. How did you get into this? Like, how did you go from like Reece Martin, human being, to Reece Martin, transportation expert in new and legacy media? How does that even happen?
Yeah, so I came to Toronto. I moved to Toronto to study here in software and technology, actually. But I was always interested, I was a little obsessed with transportation, which I think a lot of I have a young son, and so I think a lot of little kids are obsessed with trains, right? And I think it just kind of, I grew up in this, and I was really interested in transportation. And so when I had graduated university, I was looking at jobs, and it was like I had this YouTube channel about transportation issues, and there felt like there was a huge number of projects going on in Canada, really an enormous number, and the coverage in the media was just so poor, right? You had this really surface level stuff. It felt like a kind of a rewording of press releases that agencies would release, and so I thought, I should make some YouTube videos and talk about this and talk about, hey, what are they doing in Europe and in Japan and in other parts of the world? And, there are obviously, traditionally, there have been beat reporters that talk about this stuff. But as I kind of got more informed about how this stuff works, you see the beat reporter changes every couple of years on something like transportation. They're not really experts. They're not really all that interested in the topic. And so it's really hard to compete with someone that's just all they do and all they talk about and can sustain that because they have a YouTube and a Substack and stuff.
Just to give you the opposite. First of all, I agree entirely with what you've said, but let me tell you what the opposite viewpoint of that was, because I got my first job in the media. Oh God, probably I'd have to actually go back and look, but I think about 19 years ago this summer. And when I was working at a big newspaper at the time, I was at the National Post. I think it was 19 years, it might have been 18 years. But in any case, you had a group in a newspaper, and the Post was considered to be lean. Like it had lean staff compared to like the Globe or the Star. But it had a group of general assignment reporters who, generally speaking, were relatively new. They were younger in their career, and these are the guys you'd put on a story on any given day. But we also had guys that were experts in healthcare, crime in the courts, law and order, energy, business. Like you actually had, so if you had a really complicated story, you put your really good reporter who was specialized on that story, and it might take him a few days. And meanwhile, you had a cast of general assignment guys who were working their way up. And normally you'd kind of develop an expertise when you were doing the general assignment stuff, and that's how you would turn into a beat guy. But then what started happening is that the newsroom started getting smaller. And a lot of the beat guys who had seniority took buyouts because they could and took their expertise with them. So then you would take a general assignment guy, and I had enormous sympathy for them, right? Because on Monday, they're on courts. On Tuesday, a shooting downtown. They better go cover that, see what the police are saying. Wednesday, they're at Queen's Park. Thursday, they're at the big transit announcement. And Friday, hey, the Leafs have training camp. Like this, and every day they were doing something different. And you would try to preserve expertise, but I honestly think what's happened, and I think you've said this really well, a lot of the expertise has just gone to the new media ecosystem, where you have guys who have a YouTube channel or a Substack, and it can be anything. It can be, in your case, transportation. It can be space flight. It can be national security, right? Like all these wild things. You still have the subject matter experts, but they work for themselves.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that that that's a positive thing in many ways, and I think that it's good too that it's allowing more outsiders into the media, right? Because I think to some extent, it's good to have these traditions that exist in an industry like media, but it can get, some of these things are not all good. It's good to have some natural turnover in the way things are done and processes, and some creative destruction. And so I think that new media has really enabled that. It's widened the breadth of what people can access and talk about, and it's gotten people who who have some different ideas into the room to say, hey, like, what about this? What if we didn't do that thing that we're all talking about?
I think I'm probably going to write about this later in the summer. So we're recording this a bit early because I'm actually about to take a few weeks off. But one of the things I'd actually be fascinated to write about this summer, if I have the time. On Canada Day, I was up in cottage country and there was a big storm and we lost power for a couple of days. And by far the most reliable and accurate information was coming through non-traditional channels. It was social media groups, it was WhatsApp groups, it was Facebook pages. And, you had hundreds of thousands of people in a huge area who had no electricity. And it took 2 days before I saw a news story about it. And it was exactly what you said at the beginning. It was a rewritten press release where someone had taken like a Hydro One statement or something and rewrote it a bit, and it became news file for CTV. And how, when you started to do this, like you kind of had a YouTube page, what was the process of growing that like? Because you have a huge following, your videos are very successful. Did you have like a sudden breakout? How does that work? How does one go from, I like talking about this stuff, to actually being a subject matter expert in the new media?
So I think it was a combination of things. The first thing I did was I started when I was in university making these videos, and a lot of it was just like head to the ground, grinding along, making videos about very boring things, but just kind of establishing yourself as a name. And then the thing I did during the pandemic was I really leaned into the fact that I'm familiar with transportation around the world. Like it's not just Tokyo and London, it's like Bangkok and like Addis Ababa and like Dubai and all these like small cities. And like I can tell you about these things because I'm genuinely interested in this stuff. And so I think doing that, talking about a lot of other places, getting the feedback from a lot of these places in local media there, where they're like, this Canadian has some really interesting ideas, like this is really good, and meeting these international experts in places that are better at this stuff than we are. I think it really got me a lot of credibility and let me speak from a position of real authority on this stuff domestically. I think that also the fact that I talk about transit and transportation across Canada, and I can tell you what's going on in Vancouver or Quebec or in Alberta. I think it helps because I can put things in context. I can tell you if the things that Ontario is doing are dumb or if the things that Alberta is doing are great. And I think that there's actually a mix of these things. And it's very interesting how politicized the transportation is. It's a kind of the whole game for urban politics in a sense, along with maybe crime and property taxes, and yet there's all these political battles, especially in Toronto, for years and years. And as someone I grew up in Vancouver or in the Vancouver region. I came from a totally different context, and I'm just like, you guys are all crazy. Like, what have you been smoking here? Like, you have completely crazy ideas about how transportation works. And I think that, for example, I'm kind of sympathetic to Rob Ford canceling all the light rail lines and Transit City. I'm very sympathetic to that. And as someone who's like pro-transit, that's crazy to hear in Toronto. When I moved here at first, a lot of city councilors still had these Save Transit City signs up and stuff. And so I think that
I was just about to say, I don't mean to interrupt, but I remember the Save Transit City buttons where
Right.
you'd show up at an event where like 6 people had just been gunned down outside of a nightclub and there's some city councilor wearing a Save Transit City button. Like, it was insane.
No,
Yeah.
it was crazy. And I think that seeing this kind of like group of people who really did care about these issues in Toronto, but who had no idea what was going on, frankly, anywhere else in the world, or whether their ideas were particularly good, and were just kind of chasing these abstract concepts that they couldn't really define. It was a really interesting experience. And I think because I was saying stuff that was not in alignment with the existing political and ideological dynamics, people found that interesting. And yeah, I got some op-eds and stuff, and I just kind of, spread from there.
So, look, I'm going to tell you something here that might sound weird, and I don't want it to sound condescending at all, but like I want to give me a minute here. What I find fascinating about the emergence of the content creator is that subject matter expertise can be anything. And you've chosen something that has actual public policy value and news value, right? So that's why you get op-eds in papers, you can get interviews with experts. But there's been this democratizing effect where I think the pandemic actually supercharged this, but you'll have someone who was stuck at home, they were bored, they had moderately good camera skills, and then just started cooking. And now they have 1 million followers on YouTube, and they're doing like a cooking show basically. Or you have people who were musicians who just kind of, again, during the pandemic, were jamming in the basement, and they built an entire music career out of that. And one of the things that my partner, my business partner, people look at me weird when I call Jen my partner. My business partner, Jen, and I, one of the things that we've kind of had to get used to is how we are, by professional training and even kind of self-identification, journalists. But in the media ecosystem of today, we're as much content creators as anything else. No one who is listening or watching this right now, wherever they're on, is doing it through a conventional media ecosystem. They're doing it through things on platforms where we have cultivated our own audience. And I joke with Jen sometimes because it feels like we're covering the same damn story every day, but like maybe we should do a cooking channel. Like Jen makes great cakes. I'm a pretty good baker. Like maybe it would be time for us to just make a hard pivot. But when did you find this turning from a hobby into like your life? Like what happened there? Like, was it sudden, or did you wake up one day and you're like, oh my God, the channel is me?
Well, it was something I built, and I wanted to build it. And I had the opportunity as we went into COVID, where I was going to go work at a bank as a software engineer, and there was a stable paycheck, etc. And I was like, this is the most boring job I can imagine, and I don't want to do that. And nobody is really talking about transportation seriously, and at least in a way where it's, widely dispersed and everyone can hear it, and it's about the whole country. And so I decided that like that was a more interesting thing to do. I had the runway financially to do it, and I just started, and I was getting $200 a month on YouTube or something like that when I started, right? And then eventually you by covering a lot of geographies, right? That pulled in a ton of audience, right? There are people, I think when I stopped doing YouTube, 6% of my viewers were from Singapore. It's like I have viewers everywhere, and that really helped grow things. It made it so that I could get more ad revenue basically, and I could get more Patreon supporters, and that was the thing that made it possible. And it's funny now, the honest truth is writing in traditional media is something I do because it's kind of like neat. It's like, ooh, it's kind of cool to have a thing in the paper that my, grandparents will read or something, right? But it's like, it's not where the money is. And so you kind of understand why media has shifted, because it has not, like, the money has not been there to do things the old way, and obviously to create the content and to do the coverage that people are clearly very interested in. Oh, Mike.
I should unmute myself. There was an essay on, I think, the internet like a long time ago, 15, 20 years ago. You might have read it. Do you ever read 1,000 True Fans?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. See? So for the audience, 1,000 True Fans was a guy, I don't even remember who it was, but he wrote this essay
From
a
Wired.
long time. Who was it?
It was the guy from Wired, Ken
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
He basically wrote an essay. I remember it was brilliant, where he says very few authors are going to become the reliable #1 bestsellers. Very few musicians are going to have that sustainable career where they crank out #1 hit albums over and over. But what a lot of you can do is find 1,000 people who will like you enough to reliably spend $100 on you every year. And you'll be making a really nice income doing what you love. And I think that's kind of what a lot of people have attempted in the new media space. And some have succeeded. Some have succeeded wildly, right? Like you look at, I'm trying to remember the name of the kid. You might remember this because you have a better YouTube familiarity. But my kids who are older now used to watch this kid doing toy reviews.
I don't remember who this was, but this is like a genre of YouTube.
Yeah. It's a kid opening a toy and just reviewing it, and every video would get millions of views. And there are a lot of people there kind of maybe, I don't want to say, who are making a living, but they're not becoming like Mr. Beast, who is like a YouTube celebrity who makes millions off of it. And then there's people who do great work and plod along getting, 10, 20 views on their videos, but they do it because they love it. And I'm okay with that. Like it's this weird ecosystem here. I have one more question about the work you do, and then we'll actually talk about some of the transit issues here. But do you find it like you said a minute ago, and I had to laugh, right? Because the only person I know who probably reliably reads my Toronto Star column in print would be my grandmother, and um, it just makes me wonder here. You would probably be known. People would know you. You've probably been recognized, or people would reach out to you. Where do they know you from?
Oh, YouTube,
Yeah.
100% of the time, right? And that experience of having someone come up to you on the street and be like, "Oh, I love your YouTube videos." It can be both very convenient when you're with someone you want to impress, and very inconvenient when you're like trying to walk your kids somewhere and someone's like, "Hey, you like trains, right? I love your stuff." Um, yeah, YouTube's where the distribution is, right? And I think the fact that it's video, like video just has an advantage. You, I write now on Substack and I love writing, but you have to do so much more work to get someone to read something than to just like watch a video for obvious reasons. But newspapers have a structural disadvantage then as long as they're making words on a paper and not making videos, right?
Yeah, especially in an era where we all have high definition screens that we carry with us that are hooked into a light speed global data network that is fast enough to do video. Like the advantage, I think, and God, I'm showing my age here, but I could trigger some post traumatic stress with some of my old post media colleagues because years ago there was this plan, and it made sense in the context of the time, which was to try and specifically capture readership on smartphones and tablets for people who were commuting. The idea was, well, this person's going to be on the subway or a GO train or whatever, like wherever they were, whatever the regional transit was. And they're going to have 45 minutes to an hour where they're going to be bored and they're going to need something to do. So we will give them articles formatted, the same articles that go in the paper, but it's perfectly formatted for a small screen or a larger tablet screen. And people will read it while they're on the train going home. And like 2 years later, like the cellular networks got good enough that everybody on the train was watching their favorite Netflix show. And like what you said about structural disadvantage was we used other terms when we were on the inside of the newspapers, but no, you had it right. Um, okay, let's speaking of structural disadvantages, we're going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about how Canada does transit, and we're going to talk about some of the projects we're doing right now. Because I have a little theory, and you're the transit expert here. I'm going to bounce this one off you, so stick around. Reece Martin, my guest. This is On the Line. We'll be back in a moment. This episode of On the Line is also brought to you by the Forest Products Association of Canada. Canada's forest products sector is not asking Ottawa to start over. The federal government has heard the advice, it has recognized the challenges, and it has put a plan on the table. Now the test is action. That means clearing made in Canada barriers, regulatory duplication, transportation bottlenecks, and uncertainty around predictable access to manage our forests. It means working with provinces to protect communities from wildfire risk and giving companies the confidence to invest here at home. Nearly 200,000 Canadians working in this sector are looking for results. The playbook is written. Now Ottawa needs to deliver. Learn more at fpac.ca. Yeah, I don't know if you watch Max Miller. He does historical themed cooking, where he will like find an ancient Roman recipe and make it. And he was like a Disney employee until the pandemic, and he was furloughed and he was on, quarantine lockdown.
There's so
And
many, there's so many people like this with
yeah,
very interesting stories.
he and his husband just started doing these videos, and now he's got millions of followers and does global tours.
I mean, you guys should do, like it is the thing that the medium unlocks, that you guys should like bake a cake and talk politics. Like on a live stream, have it set up, like Doug did with his cheesecake or whatever.
Yeah.
It's that the people love it.
My sister's idea, and it made me laugh, is I should bring on politicians and then watch an episode of like Star Trek The Next Generation with them and kind of just like splice in, oh yeah, this is the great scene. Worf is about to kill this guy. Hey, what's up with your tax initiative? And this like really start combining the content. So But no, you're right. The pandemic supercharged this, right? So anyways, let's get back to it. 5, 4, 3. We're here with Reece Martin. And Reece, how do you want people to find you? Like, I should have asked you that earlier, but like we spent like the last 15 so minutes talking about how you built a new media career. Let's actually talk transit now. But first, where should people go check you out?
So they can find me on all the platforms at RM Transit, and then they can read my Substack, which is the Transit Brief, on Substack.com. Yeah.
And as always, we'll drop all the links, et cetera, into our show notes. So no matter where people are getting this, we'll be able to push them your way. So what I mentioned at the start, there was this very funny thing happened where I had read this article you had written in the Star. And I was actually thinking it would be great to reach out for you, have some good summer content where we talk about transit projects. And I had watched some of your videos on YouTube, so I was familiar with you. And then I had this email from you just kind of reaching out just for an introduction. So every once in a while, things go your way. And I like to bank those when they happen because they don't happen all the time. What were you writing about in the Star just a couple of days ago? Walk me through that.
So Canada is pretty serious about doing a high-speed rail project between Toronto, Montreal, and also to Quebec City. That the and also is a pretty important, part of this. And like we're what I like to tell people is that we're pretty serious about doing this. Like if you wanted to build it, you would be going through the processes we're going through, and we're hitting a lot of the expected landmines along the way. And it's a bit frustrating because if you talk to the officials running the project, you listen to the things they say, they'll point out the California high-speed rail project, which we have hindsight on. And the same with HS2 in the UK. We've seen these other English-speaking language jurisdictions really struggle to build anything. And so we should be able to, learn from their mistakes, right? And do something a bit better. And to some extent, we've learned some things and we're learning how to make new mistakes. But I really think that high-speed rail is just an analog for any other big infrastructure project that you might want to build. And it's really disconcerting because the Carney government, they want to get big projects done. But the truth is that, if Pierre Poilievre were to be a prime minister, he'd want to get some pipelines done. You'd want to build some roads, presumably, maybe also some transit. And if you can't build the high-speed rail, you can't build the other stuff too. They have a lot in common. And so the same problems come up across all of these projects, and the politics of them and the way that our politics gets wrapped around these projects, it's not unique, but it's something that we really have to fix if we want to be able to deliver infrastructure, defense, any big initiative.
I'm going to tell you something. I have to be a little vague because I don't want to dox myself, but my family has a piece of property and the property had an outbuilding on it and the outbuilding needed to be fixed. And between the time when it was built and when we were getting the building permits to fix it, because it had been weathered, it needed a new roof, it needed quite a bit of work. And some of the municipal zoning rules had changed. And I remember thinking at the time, that's going to complicate things. It took, if I remember I would have to check, but it was at least 3 years, and it might have been closer to 3.5 years to get the permits for this. And I remember just with this incredible world-weary, soul-sucking resignation that you can only get with almost 20 years in the legacy media, I remember reading one of the emails that had come through from the municipality and looking at the latest delays and excuses. And I remember literally thinking to myself, I don't think we're building high-speed rail. Because what we're talking about is one outbuilding on one piece of property in one municipality that everybody agrees needs work. And the work will be done to code by local businesses. There was absolutely no reason this should have been a slow process, except that the bureaucracy was dysfunctional. And I start thinking about that bureaucracy multiplied across numerous jurisdictions, political jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions, and then you have to factor in local resistance for people who don't want a high-speed train going through their ancestral lands, possible consultation with indigenous groups, the fact that this is going to go certainly over the lifespan of any particular federal government. I would love to have a high-speed rail link between Toronto and Montreal. I honestly, Reece, I'll tell you, I would not bet money that we'll ever actually build a thing, not in my lifetime. I think there's a good chance, but I don't think it's over 50%. What the hell? Why? Like, I know it's a vague question, but why are we so bad at this?
Like, I think the first thing to say is that, while acknowledging that you're not wrong, is that there is this perception that we are very bad at projects, which is not wrong. But I think that what is not appreciated is that we are sometimes actually pretty good at projects. The example I like to bring up to people is Vancouver built this new subway line for the Olympics. It's very similar to the Eglinton Crosstown in Toronto, which is kind of the project everyone knows as a huge disaster across the country. And that project, which was built only a few years before the Eglinton Crosstown, was sort of a more impressive project, technically speaking, a better project. It was completed for a quarter of the price, and it was completed in about 4 years in the lead up to the Olympics. And then a few years later, actually, years after the Eglinton Crosstown in Toronto had started construction, Montreal started building this new giant metro system for the whole Montreal region, which was a doubling in size of their subway. So it was a huge project by international standards even. They built it at something like less than a quarter of the price of, again, the Eglinton Crosstown. They did it in less than a decade. And it was actually many of the same people who had built that line in Vancouver. And it was because it had been driven by this pension fund, which was a kind of unique asset that Canada was able to leverage here. And many of those same people are now working on high-speed rail. And so with that context, why are we bad at these things? Well, I think it's because we forget that having the right people in the room working on the projects is a big part of them succeeding. You have to hire people that know how to do big projects and ideally know how to do the type of big projects that you're actually trying to build. But at the same time, you have to not be overly obsessed with organizational structure, but you have to be concerned about organizational structure. And so in the case of the high-speed rail project, ALTO, what's going wrong with it? Well, we have this obsession with public-private partnerships in Canada. They're not something that the places that are good at building transit really use, but we've seen some successes. Both of those projects I mentioned were public-private partnerships. But in the case of ALTO and some other projects, we've basically created a new government bureaucracy whose whole role is to deliver the project, who then goes and hires a bunch of private sector people who have delivered projects. And this isn't to say that the government shouldn't have people that are in charge of running a project, but having a team of people who are not experienced in running high-speed rail projects or whatever, ultimately managing a group of people whose job it is to deliver a high-speed rail project, it creates problems. And this is a structure that we've seen kind of used before in Canada. And I think it's things like this, right? It's looking, do other countries do this stuff? No, not really. Well, then maybe we shouldn't do it because other countries have high-speed rail and, energy infrastructure and big militaries and we don't. So if they're doing different things, maybe we should consider why we are different.
Nah. Nah, it's probably nothing. We'll figure it out. One of the things that Jen and I have identified as I don't want to call it a uniquely Canadian pathology because I doubt it's unique, but a significant Canadian pathology is that in certain countries, or even Vancouver, which you mentioned, they had the Olympics coming up, they needed a new transit line, they had to sustain it. It was important for everyone involved that the project be successful. Like there would have been real public and unavoidable consequences for failure. And I think what often happens in Canadian policymaking in general, not limited to transit or transportation, is that as long as the politician gets to announce stuff happening, they're getting what they need out of it, right? Like they think to themselves, we're going to announce this project and it's not going to be ready for a decade, right? I'm going to be out of office by then. I'll be doing something else. So the value to me is the announcements along the way. We posing for photos with a bunch of guys with hard hats on, or showing up at a Chamber of Commerce events going, my government has committed $11 billion. And that's where the political value comes from. Whether or not the project actually works doesn't end up being their problem. And I don't carry a lot of water for Doug Ford. But when he came into power, the crosstown was already a bit dysfunctional. And I certainly don't think he helped. I'm not saying that. But I think what happens is they come in and they kind of go, oh, okay, how do we just not talk about this until it's open? And then after years of like refusing to answer questions about it, then Doug Ford's at every ribbon cutting and opening ceremony, because that's when he gets the value. But the person who actually commissioned the project, they were long since out of public life.
No, absolutely. And I think part of this has to be in the public, right? Like the public, we have to change our attitude. The good example I would bring up is, I talk about these projects that have been executed really well, right? But if you look at the media coverage of them, the media coverage overwhelmingly will say things like they're super delayed, they're super expensive, which is fine. They're expensive and they're delayed sometimes. But what it does is it creates an incentive to increase the budget and to promise less aggressive timelines. And once you've increased the budget and given yourself twice as much time, you're going to use that time and you're going to use that extra money, right? And so we've created a lot of incentives to not deliver stuff late, to the point where you kind of adapted a system that delivers projects, and the same thing is, this is all true of like defense procurement as well, right? Where you basically slacken the whole system so that people don't scream at you when things go wrong, as they inevitably will for any large project, right? And that just kind of creates more fat that just kind of makes the whole thing get bogged down even more. And so I think that's a huge part of fixing this. And I also think it's a huge part in fixing this and changing our political culture. Something I really respect about like Japan, Korea, Germany is that they get big projects started and they're often more depoliticized than they are in this country, but they just grind away at them. And often over many different political dynasties, these projects will be ground away at. Politicians will talk about them, but not a ton. But they will get done eventually. We will reap the rewards, and you'll move on. And now you'll be a country that, say, doesn't have the same problems that it did when that project started, right? And then the new politicians, new political class can start new projects.
Jen and I, we call it the input versus output problem, right? Like political careers in this country are made based on the things you initiate and pledge to do and promise to do. And if it fails, you're either retired or you just blame someone else, and everybody skates. I've been thinking, just as you and I have been talking here, like everything you're saying sounds right to me, but I don't have nearly your expertise on transit issues. Everything you're saying sounds right to me because I do know our military procurement system. And a lot of what you're describing, especially kind of like, well, the Army needs new vehicles. Option A, buy the vehicles. Option B, spin up new federal bureaucracy to become the leading federal agency that handles the procurement of vehicles. And first, they'd better staff up, but they don't currently have any staff. So they got to go get consultants to oversee the staffing process. And it just goes on and on and on forever. And meanwhile, like Army got no trucks, but we have an entire new federal bureaucracy that we've spun up from scratch. And as we've been talking today, I've been thinking about some of the other On the Line episodes that I have done recently, or that Jen has done. Jen had Andrew Leach on just a couple of weeks ago, I think maybe last week, to talk why it's so hard to build pipelines. I think the week before that, I had Dr. Brian Goldman on. Why is it so hard for us to fix the healthcare system? National defense issues, which I've already mentioned. You can kind of go on and on and on with this. We do have successes. And I think you were right to mention Montreal and Vancouver as recent success stories. But then I also look at it seems like every other day there's some other story out of Ottawa where the LRT's broken because apparently we didn't design it to withstand summer or winter. And everybody's back on the buses. The crosstown in Toronto was an absolute friggin' nightmare, but now that it's open, it's fantastic. I ride the thing multiple times a week. It seems like my kids are on the damn thing every day, and it basically always works. The thing actually became, probably because of how much time we spent on it, the thing became a very reliable success. A bit further north in the city, the new Line 6 is a catastrophe. Okay. And I just don't really understand what we're doing here, right? And I joke sometimes, okay, now we're talking Alto, we're talking high-speed rail. I know you've made the point that they've actually gone out and recruited some of the right people. But every time I hear about some bold new Canadian initiative, I just think to myself, brought to you by the same people who do our healthcare system and our defense procurement and our infrastructure in general. If you could, I'm going to give you dictatorial powers, not for a day, that's not enough time, for a week. How do you fix Canadian transit? Like, how do we actually get to the point where we're pretty reliably good at this? Like, are there repeat pathologies that tend to crop up when we get something wrong?
Yeah, I think a big thing is the reactionary policy making, right? When we have an issue, we flop into the opposite direction, right? And so and we don't learn much of a lesson, right? And so we now have it so that in Canada, a country that could use some more subways because we have all these condos everywhere. We have possibly the most expensive subways anywhere in the world. And so you can imagine what that does to a society when you want to have these dense cities and you can't deliver the transportation infrastructure required for a dense city, right? We are a service economy and we cannot move the units of a service economy, that is people, around to engage in the service economy. And so that it's a critical issue. Fixing things, I think what it requires, right, is to some extent getting rid of some of these political boundaries that we have. The fact that provinces have so many responsibilities devolved down to them is a problem in transportation because you want scale. You want to be able to deliver projects to the same standards across the country, right? Instead of making the same mistake 5 different ways in 5 different places. And so if you look at a place like France, they have basically a team of crack consultants that came out of Paris that, developed a lot of transportation projects in that city because it's a big city with a lot of transportation. And now they go around as basically government operated consultants who are experts in building projects. And so now every little French town has a tram system because Paris built a bunch. They got good at it. They had experienced public servants who understood how to do this. And so they don't have to go to some engineering firm to hire someone, this week and then fire them the next week to deliver these projects, right? And there's a pipeline, there's consistent funding. So the government knows, it's going to hire some people, but it's not going to grow this giant bureaucracy. It's going to be the team of people that work on this issue, and they're going to move around the country and do this in different places, right? It's going to be built to the same standards. There's a supply chain here where we've got companies that can make stuff. We're going to make sure those companies are kind of regularly making stuff, so they're not. It's not red light, green light, and they're getting losing their skills and their talented workforce, right? So it's all of this. It's looking at mistakes objectively. I mean, the crosstown had all these problems, right? Is there going to be any kind of postmortem? Has Metrolinx released any sort of thing that says? And I know that they have learned lessons, right? But they haven't gone to the effort, at least not publicly, to say what are the lessons we've learned and how and why is it now that as a response to the problems in the crosstown, the Ontario line is being built in the Earth's mantle. It's like halfway to China, and that's great. It's going to mean that we don't have so many delays, but that just means it's like the most expensive subway that has ever been built possibly in the world. And so it's that reaction to a problem. Instead of saying, everyone's sitting down saying, it is hard to build subways. We're going to talk about this so that the next time we do something like this, we do it a bit better. Instead, it's just like, we're going to fire all these people and bring in new people and do something totally different.
I think something you said a minute ago was bang on. And you were talking about in other countries, France being an obvious example. About a year ago, I was in Spain and riding their trains was like science fiction. Wow, this stuff works really well. Countries that have, I'm not trying to torque this. I can't think of a nicer way to say this. Countries with politicians that are grown-ups seem to do better at this because how many times you've mentioned Rob Ford in Transit City. I think that's maybe the apex example in recent Canadian political history, where you had an entire transit project that was underway, starting to be funded, starting to be planned, some work was starting, but then it became an election campaign issue, and a guy campaigned against it, won, canceled the whole thing. Had to reboot it, ended up repurposing parts of it. We've seen, and then later, John Tory, when he succeeded Rob Ford, he had his regional transit vision, campaigned on it, won, never ended up happening. We look at Jean Chrétien with the friggin' helicopters coming in campaigning. Took us 20 years to actually end up replacing them. And the helicopters we replaced them with suck. So like, it's just, there has got to be an ability to kind of look at a problem we have as a society and say, what would the right thing to be do, and then not fight about it every 4 years. And I don't know how we balance the actual need to have real democratic accountability and oversight without also rebooting everything from absolute scratch every 4 years and then being shocked that nothing ever gets done. I don't know how to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the big thing that I think about a lot these days, and I think this is true for a lot of the initiatives we're talking about, healthcare system, defense, transportation, is this stuff kind of has to be sewers. And what I mean by that is nobody really gets up in a fuss about a new sewer being built. Nobody really, we have experts. We know that they're experts. And, there should be some governmental process that's heavy enough with the bureaucracy and the language that you have to be pretty interested to get involved to keep people on their toes and engaged with the process, that we're not like gold plating our sewers. But like, these are pieces of infrastructure that need to exist for a country to exist. And when you kind of elevate each individual project into this grand thing that says something about who we are, and that politicians feel they need to, like, no politician's going to cancel a sewer. You're just going to build this. And so this is what we need. Like transportation in particular, it's like a fiber optic line or a sewer. It's just a thing that has to exist at a base level so that people can move around cities or move around parts of the country. And I think kind of just like taking down the temperature and being like, it's not going to be perfect. Maybe you're not going to like the color of concrete that we bought for the sewer, but it's like going to transport your solid waste away. And so that's like, it's fine. I think that to some extent we need to do this. We need to like be less interested in the details of these issues and just like create systems that will reproduce them. And then that's how you end up being like China, where they just like pop out a new subway line every year, right? There's some very experienced government workers who they put up the signs, they get the hoarding, they dig the tunnel, and then it's like new subway line. We move on to our next subway line, which is how it works for a lot of things here, right?
I love the sewer comparison. And there's another one that I would mention kind of in similar vein. And in recent years, Toronto has almost found a way to screw this up. But in general, you don't have passionate political debates over trash collection. Like there are very basic fundamentals in a society that are not sexy, that if it doesn't work, we'll die of cholera, and we just have to get it right. And trash collection and sewers are great examples of that. And I think that's such a great example, right? Because if your trash doesn't get picked up, you notice it real quick. And if your sewer backs up, you notice it even faster. And I love the idea of this actually being run effectively by an elite crack team of technocrats who have political and democratic accountability and oversight, but we don't fight election campaigns about their proposals. We talked a few minutes ago about your Toronto Star article just a few days ago, and it really made me think of the military procurement stuff I've done, right? Because you would be able to explain this better. I'm going to mangle this, but basically, we basically more or less have an idea of the route we would want the high-speed rail to go on. It would go from Toronto, it would go northeast, kind of into cottage country. It would make this big curve, and it would go straight east, basically to Ottawa, connect Ottawa and Toronto, and then there'd be like an Ottawa to Montreal length as well. That's the logical route to me. Like connect the two biggest cities and the national capital. That makes sense. But now the politicians are like, well, we should also include Kingston, which is hundreds of kilometers off the planned route in a completely different direction we want to put this thing. But it's a relatively large city with some fairly competitive electoral ridings. And the Liberals don't want to neglect it. And it just reminded me of every time when one of our allies is like, hey, we built a pretty good warship. Would you like to buy some? And we're like, yeah, we might, but we're going to have to change the following 1,900 things to Canadian specifications. And we end up getting warships that are way more expensive, take much longer to build, and ultimately have less capability. That seems to be the Canadian way of doing things. And when I saw what that the Liberals were starting to talk about, oh, we should put the high-speed rail on a new southern route that doesn't make any sense, that or at least hasn't been the one we've been looking at so far. I'm like, oh, like we haven't even officially begun working on this yet, and the politicians are going to find ways to screw it up.
Absolutely. And look, like that is why these things have to, like, they exist in politicized environments. Obviously, like these things can get over the line, but it's much harder when you don't have a sort of like impartial body. And this is a big problem. In a lot of countries, there is a national railway company. We sold ours, which seems in retrospect like maybe a bad decision because now we have this very profitable thing that could be like, oh, you need a new port, like we're going to run the rail line there, etc. Anyways, they have a government agency that serves the whole country, that knows railways, and oftentimes, this is an organization that'll be highly respected. It's the place that like smart kids want to go work at. And so what happens is that it actually looks bad for politicians to say, oh no, we're not going to do what they say. It's like, no, those guys, they know their shit about trains or about rail lines, and you really are foolish to question them. The problem is because we create a new organization or a new project every 5 years, there isn't any weight behind it, right? It's like, well, we just created you. Now we can tell you what to do, right? And so that you get these problems. And I mean, the ultimate original sin of all this stuff is that it didn't start as a high-speed rail project that we've decided we're going to do this. It started because we were going to do this high-frequency rail, but then it's like, why would you build something so expensive and it would be like slower than the best railway in like Ethiopia? So then that didn't make a lot of sense. So we're going to so it's like, well, you should do high speed because like we're going to be like the only rich country where it would make sense to build that won't have it. But then you're taking all of these assumptions from this earlier project, like we got to go to Peterborough. It's like maybe, but like maybe we don't. Like why don't we assess it from like a ground truth where we were deciding to do high speed from the beginning? And so because the politicians don't want to abandon an old thing, but they don't want to, piss off this riding or this riding, you get this project it's optimized politically, but it's not optimized as a transportation project, which is like what it lives or dies by, right? And so I think, as you said with the military procurements, right, this stuff, like it might be optimal from a electoral politics perspective, but like electoral politics isn't what gets me to Montreal to see the Canadiens game, at after I'm done work.
I said years ago, and again, this is my existential despair creeping in, but I wrote this in a column where I said, people think Canada's military procurement system sucks. And I understand. But the only reason they think it sucks is because they mistakenly believed the thing we call our military procurement system exists to procure stuff for the military. It's actually a regional economics development agency. That's its real purpose. And we call it a military procurement system, but the purpose of the thing is to distribute federal dollars to high-value political ridings and well-connected businesses. Along the way, we will sometimes incidentally end up obtaining equipment that the military will use, but it's not actually what it's for. So it's almost kind of like a happy bonus. And, it's funny. I thought this would be like a nice, fun, light interview, but now I'm getting into the depths of despair here because I'm imagining what our high-speed rail map is eventually going to end up looking like. And it's just like a zigzag, just linking every possible population center in the country together, because that's the only way we'll actually get a political coalition together here. Like, honestly, Reece, like my kingdom for a politician, and it could well be Mark Carney, who steps up and goes, no, this is idiotic. The purpose of this thing is to link our national capital with our two largest economic centers. So we're going to do that. Thank you. No further questions, right? Like, or to quote Trump, like, thank you for your attention to this matter. Like, this is the route it makes sense to do it on. And along the way, obviously, you have to adjust it for geographic features or sensitive environmental sites, and you have to consult with indigenous communities. Like, I get it. Like, I understand that. But you have to kind of minimize how much you torture the route to do the thing you want it to do. So I guess the question is whether is high-speed rail intended to link our two largest economic centers to our national capital, or is it a regional political patronage machine? I don't know. Like, I think I know what it could end up being based on how it's structured right now. You seem a little bit more optimistic, but I guess time will tell, right? Like if they do it fast enough, maybe they'll get away with building it to the appropriate specifications without anyone noticing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hope. And look, ultimately, I think that the big error that people make, and it's like, Kingston should have a good train. I want a good train. Everyone wants a good train, right? Good trains are nice, but the problem as I see it, in the way that we operate, is that like it's much easier to justify a good train to Kingston when it can plug into an already existing good train that actually exists between Toronto and Montreal, right? And I just would hope that our politicians can kind of say, in interfering this way to try to make that and this project our perfect pony project, like we're making it less likely to actually get built. And if we don't actually have high-speed rail, it doesn't matter what you promise to Kingston or Peterborough or any other place, right? At some point, the point of building high-speed rail has to be building high-speed rail. I think that we can do it. I think that it would be a huge boon for the whole country, honestly, because of how much of the economies of the country are in this tight corridor. But yeah, it's like every time a politician does something like that, they're saying that what matters really here is, as you say, basically the this politics of handing money to one community or another, not the politics of like there are 20 million people here that we want to move between these gigantic cities. Like, how do we do that? And so yeah, it'll whether or not we succeed on this it's a bellwether for whether we can do any large thing without politics derailing it.
I confess I'm worried because I've seen these kinds of projects before, and I think something you were talking about in China, how they basically have, okay, we're finished this project, we're moving on, we're doing the next one here. Like even in the GTA, and you would know this better. Like I don't pretend to be a transit expert. I know my own city. My understanding as a sometime visitor to Montreal, and I read their newspapers, and ditto for Vancouver, that those cities are reasonably well served by transit, whereas Toronto is way behind. Why do we not have a version of what France or China has going just in the greater Toronto area? You finish one project, you immediately move on to the next one. Like you have like overlapping planning teams. I think we're maybe trying to do that because we got the Ontario line going when kind of the crosstown was wrapping up. But I don't know if people realize that you could spend $100 billion on transit in Toronto and only get it caught up roughly to where it should be.
Yeah. But this is the big problem is that we have committed, like Doug Ford, my premier, he's doing a lot of transit. I'm a big fan of that. I have other qualms with other things Doug is doing, but he launched this enormous transit initiative, and like, yeah, it's like $100 billion. Like, it's not small peanuts. And so they're building this new Ontario line. They're building a bunch of subway extensions, etc. And that stuff is great. But the thing I would raise here is that each of these projects is costing about 5 to 10 times more than it would cost in France or Korea or China. And in China, people think it's because they can do whatever. And it's less the case that they can do whatever than people think. They are actually just very competent as well. But any of these places that they can deliver this infrastructure. We are biting off so much, but we're biting it off at these astronomical prices. And honestly, the more responsible thing to do would have been to say, we're going to do one or two projects at a time. We're going to phase these out over a long period of time. Because part of why they're costing so much is because we've overcooked the construction industry. We're basically going from almost nothing, right? Before the crosstown, there was almost nothing being built. Then crosstown, then like 4 crosstowns at once, right? And I can already imagine that once these projects are done, we're going to go back to like, wow, we took on a lot of debt. We're going to stop building and we're going to restart this whole cycle, right? The way that places, including like say Calgary historically, were able to build really efficiently is because the municipal government had some people that were good at like drawing up the drawings and doing the engineering. And then every couple of years they do like 2 more stations, right? And if you're a bigger city, maybe every couple of years you're doing another project, another big line. You're doing it to common standards, etc. It's this on and off again of the throttle that's killing Toronto, right? And then it's the fact that when it comes to the price of building projects, which, as I said, is 10 times what it is in like other rich countries, we the price is just the escape valve when every other thing creeps in. So the neighbors want a tunnel, then this person wants a new park. We've got to put a bike lane on this street. We can't close this because if we close this, they're going to be angry. And so all of these different things, the city, even though the province can technically override the city, the province doesn't want to override the city. The province actually we got to work with the city. We got to collaborate. And so all of these things come together. And the result is that the only thing that's allowed to budge is the cost, right? No one will say no. And so you get these expensive projects. And the reality is, if there's not a good business case, which when it's expensive, there's less of one, you just get less projects built. And so Toronto, that's the tyranny here, is that we have, at this point, the most expensive subways in the world. We don't seem to have a particular plan to make them less expensive. And so naturally, it's taken a long time. And it's concerning overall, because if a single, some of these subway projects, a single person, a lift of a pen, there's a hospital you could have built at this point, given how expensive these projects are, right? And so transportation's great, transit's great, but at some point you have to recognize the cost benefit of spending all this money and the things it's costing you elsewhere.
I think, you and I have been talking for almost an hour now, and I don't want to burn your whole afternoon. There is one kind of big picture question I want to ask you. And I guess this is a logical point to make the pivot, because you and I have been talking mostly about transit, moving people. And you said, I thought you said it very elegantly earlier in the recording, where you had said that, in a service economy, moving people is how you actually get economics done. So I have not had an office in downtown Toronto since the pandemic. At the time, I was a senior editor at the National Post. I had an office downtown that I would go to sometimes. I didn't go every day. I'm more of a work-at-home guy. But, what I realized after the pandemic was that I would probably never need a full-time office downtown Toronto again, but I would sometimes need to meet people. So I joined a club. And I'm not by nature a club guy, but I joined the Royal Canadian Military Institute because it's a place where I can do lunches and they have boardrooms and I can do meetings there. And there's like the Toronto dysfunction tax that gets tacked on to every commute, where I'll have a 12:30 meeting and it will be 11 o'clock at my house. And I'll be thinking to myself, if I leave right now, I will either be an hour early or late. And I don't know what it's going to be, because if I drive, I don't know what I'm going to run into. If I take an Uber or a cab, I don't know what I'm going to run into. If I take transit, I don't know what I'm going to run into. And it's ridiculous because the actual distance is only about 6 kilometers. And, weather permitting, a lot of the time, you could just walk. And you would not necessarily get there any later just by walking. And you and I are talking about transit and people, but you study transportation in general. And I was at a conference a couple of months ago where we were talking about our strained relationship with our neighbors, the United States. And one of the panelists, and I wish I remember who it was, I probably should have written it down or something, but one of the panelists basically said one of the strategic problems Canada has is that almost all of our transportation infrastructure goes south. Where we do have the Port of Montreal, Port of Halifax, Port of Vancouver, and a port in Prince Rupert as well. So we do have some ability to ship stuff east and west by coast. We have the St. Lawrence Seaway. Ships do come into Toronto. And obviously we do have some domestic transportation links, like our cities link to each other. But overwhelmingly, we have oriented our transportation grid in this country to go south into the United States. And if Europe showed up tomorrow and wanted to buy $1 trillion worth of Canadian whatever, I don't know how we get it to them. And, it's not a shock to me. You and I have been talking transit this for almost an hour here. There's a lot of money being spent on port modernization in Canada, right? How many extra containers can we squeeze through Vancouver, Montreal, and can we punch up Halifax to be like a much larger port complex? And I think in all those cases, yes, we can. I think if we spend the money on that, we'll actually get some value. A lot of talk already about airports in Canada. Can we sell some of them off, make them more productive, make them more efficient? Do we need new ones? Again, that's a transportation problem. We're trying to figure out how to connect this country to the world here. Big picture question for you. Are we any better at that stuff than we are at transit? Like our ports and highway links and things like that, or conventional rail, like not passenger rail, but freight rail? Do we do better at that stuff because it's kind of less in your face politicized?
We do, definitely. We're definitely better. I mean, I think on the aviation front, I think we're pretty much up there with the best in the world in terms of the way that we manage our airports. That's done quite competently. In terms of freight rail, it's also, while it is unfortunate that that it creates a lot of problems for all kinds of other type of infrastructure that you might want to lay along those tracks, we are good at freight rail. We move more freight rail than all of Europe every year in terms of tonnage. Now, people might debate, like in Europe, it's a higher value of goods because it's moved up market. They move more cars and stuff. But like we're pretty good at freight transportation. I think the thing that we struggle with, honestly, is roads. Right? We don't have a single expressway that crosses the whole country. If you drive the Trans-Canada Highway through like Northern Ontario, it's crazy, right? This is not so that's a real impotent because you want to have trucks moving goods around. That's a real problem. You don't have, highway links to a lot of the north, right? You have these very poor quality roads through the prairies. The roads are honestly kind of abhorrent. And honestly, in the cities even, our roads are not that well managed. And that comes down to things like the fact that as a country, and this swings in the other direction, we don't toll the roads. It's funny because it's a controversial topic, but you know where they toll the roads? Japan, but also in Texas, because they understand that congestion is kind of, it's like a calcification of your arteries. Transportation doesn't work and you just can't move anything and systems break down. And so our transportation picture overall is slightly better, and we're interested in fixing various things. But a lot of the same problems exist, and especially when it comes to the price, it's always worth looking. We're spending this much. How much are they spending in Spain on this stuff or Korea to deliver the same thing, right? So that's what I'd say.
One more big picture question for you. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's a question in two parts, but it's kind of related to what we were just talking about. I know for a fact that senior people in various levels of government will listen to this, and they will then send me snarky texts. If you could get them to walk away knowing anything, and I'm going to put the question to you this way: what do you want them to know? And let me be a little bit more specific. If you want to answer that question generically, by all means. But another one would just be this: what are we good at that we can build on? What are we bad at that we need to fix? Like, give them a bit of a compliment sandwich there, or not a sandwich, maybe like give them a twofer. Tell them something they're doing great at that we should learn from, and tell them something we're terrible at that we need to get better at.
Well, look, we have cities for urban transportation that have done a really good job. Like Vancouver is kind of the gold standard. In fact, I argue to people that the SkyTrain system is basically like would be at home in a city in Europe or Asia. It's basically, it's hard to argue that there's any serious flaws with that thing. It is really good. They've built a little more every few years since 1986. It's pretty cost effective. It's gotten a lot more expensive, but it's still running at like half the price of projects in Toronto. And so, that matters because that's money that you would use for important other things. And so I think that's a big thing. I think we need to have a serious conversation about public-private partnerships. The private sector is always involved in these big projects because, it's not like the guys shoveling snow just like, put their snow shovels away and get pickaxes and start digging the subway tunnel, right? Private companies always build this infrastructure everywhere outside of like communist Russia, right? But you have to get the mix of public and private right. And I think a huge thing, and this is a challenge for us, is we have to stop learning from the UK and America, because on infrastructure, they're more dysfunctional than we are. The place that we should really learn from, the place that does nuclear power really well, they do subways at a tenth the price, they build all kinds of infrastructure, road infrastructure that's very impressive, is France. We have a really unique ability in this country because we actually have people like people in government that speak French. But instead, when we bring French experts over here, we tell them they have to follow all of our Canadian rules, which are just American rules because we have so many of the same standards. And then, of course, the bridge costs, 5 times what it should, and the subway is late and over budget, right? So I think that's the big thing is where do we learn our lessons from? Do we learn it from the people who've like famously not been able to like build a high-speed railway in the last, so the only high-speed railway the UK has is the one that France built for them for the Channel Tunnel. Outside of that, like it's just dysfunction after dysfunction. So I think let's use our new relationships with the rest of the world. The Koreans, they're going to build a high-speed rail. Let's just go to these places and don't try to import them. Go there and learn how they do it, and then adjust accordingly for our local environment. That's what I would say is really important.
I know the politicians will never do this, but I swear to God, at this point, I would just throw the keys to the French. I would just say, guys, we trust you. Have fun. Here is some money. We will ram through whatever zoning permissions you tell us you're going to need. Thank you. And, we appreciate your support because
have been done. That the successful projects we've had have often not been so far off of that.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, a couple of years ago, riding the high-speed trains, and just last summer, riding the Spanish ones, and then crossing the border into Portugal, and their trains weren't that good. They were okay. Like, they were better than what we had.
Yeah,
but
they're not Spain. And that's
the Spanish, my understanding is, were like the best. And oh well. Tell everybody one more time, people who have enjoyed this talk, where can they find your stuff? Where can they check you out?
Find me at RM Transit on all of the socials, and you can read my various thoughts on transportation in Canada and sometimes around the world at thetransitbrief.net.
Reece, thank you so much for this. We have yet to fix the world as we know it, but we've given it the old college try, so we'll keep at it, huh?
Yeah, no, A for effort.
This episode is also brought to you by Cameco Corporation. In nuclear energy, timelines and costs matter. Incomplete designs carry real risk of delays and cost overruns. That's why the AP1000 reactor is the right choice for Canada. It is already operating today and ready now to deliver the power we need with 100% Canadian ownership and strong participation from Canadian suppliers. If we are serious about building Canada and powering it on time and on budget, the choice is clear. The AP1000 reactor is the only option that delivers. To learn more, visit ap1000.cameco.com. That was my conversation with Reece Martin. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to put the links to his stuff in the show notes here. Check out his YouTube, check out his Substack, check out his socials. It's just a weird coincidence that I was thinking I should talk to this guy this summer, and he was reaching out to me as well. So, hey, sometimes things go your way. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you're having a great summer. The line is largely on vacation this week, but we are going to keep podcasting. So tune in, enjoy it. www.readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe. We'll check back with you in a few days. Take care.